Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment, where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. This week we're talking to New York Times bestselling author Phoef Sutton. He's the winner of 2 Emmy Awards for his work on the classic television series Cheers, and a Peabody Award for the legal drama Boston Legal. As a screenwriter, his credits include Mrs. Winterbourne and The Fan with Robert De Niro. He's also written plays and novels, among them 2015's Crush, 15 Minutes to Live, and, with Janet Ivanovich, Wicked Charms. His forthcoming books in 2016 are Curious Minds with Janet Ivanovich and Heart Attack and Vine, a sequel to Crush. He lives in South Pasadena, California with his wife and 2 daughters. Say hello, Phoef.
Hello.
Hello. I'm so excited that you could join us. I was wondering if you could read for us a little bit of Crush. I know we've selected a little section, so I thought it'd be good for people to hear the rhythm of the
All right. Well, this is just the opening, so I don't have to set it up.
No, perfect.
So it goes like this. The first time Amelia saw him, she didn't think of him as a person so much as an obstacle. Cold eyes and muscles, he was standing in the corner of the club like a piece of furniture, only larger. The bouncer. No need to wonder why they called him Crush. His hands looked like they could squeeze the air out of her windpipe in a second. The club was called the Nocturne on Melrose at Clinton. It was one of those night spots with no sign out front, so you had to be cool enough to know about it, to even know about it. Inside was all darkness and colored lights and blaring music, gorgeous young girls and buff young boys trying to convince themselves they were having the time of their lives. The decor was deep red and studded velvet, Queen Victoria meets Sekar Massak. The bar itself was a mahogany monstrosity that the owner had lifted from some gold rush ghost town. The pretty female bartender was dwarfed behind it, but Crush, stationed at the east end, was big enough to make even that huge bar look pint-sized. In his black T-shirt, fit tightly over his bulging muscles, he faded into the decor, not blending in with the walls, but looking like he was the wall. His clean-shaven head had a nasty scar running from above his left eye across his skull to the back of his neck like a racing stripe. Only his startling blue eyes made Amelia think there was a human being behind the barrier. Crush made no extraneous sounds or movements. Like a good bouncer, he made sure you didn't notice him unless he wanted you to.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know what strikes me is that this reminds me in a way, this is your main character of this new series.
Yeah.
This one that came out in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
You had another one coming in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, you're describing this gigantic person. So the first thing that pops instantly to my mind, of course, is Reacher, right? Is that the goal, to have, like, countless adventures with this one character so you can keep coming back to it?
Well, yeah. I mean, that is the goal. That is the goal. When I was young, I read all the Travis McGee books and
right.
The Parker books by Richard Stark, and they I loved them. And when I wanted to write a series of books, I thought, get somebody like that.
Right.
Somebody who is big and tough and can handle himself. Somebody who's basically nothing like me.
Right, that's probably pretty common. Although Spillane looked a lot like Hammer.
Yes, it was shorter, but yes.
Spillane thought he looked a lot like Hammer.
I know. Well, he played Hammer in that movie, Girl Hunter.
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
he played Mike Hammer in one movie.
That's
but it's so funny because when you talk to publishers today, a lot of times you pitch a series and they're like, we want this to be, say, a trilogy, and it needs to, like, really shake the earth and change things so that by the time you come out, the world is different. And that's just not, what my greatest interest in usually is, I want, like, something where every year a new one is going to come out, same characters, I see them get into a similar adventure, like their old
friend.
I mean, have you noticed this trend?
Yeah, I have, and that's an interesting thing. I noticed it in TV too, because it used to be, I've worked in TV forever, and it used to be that a series, particularly a comedy series, but even a drama, was basically at the end of the series, the characters were in the same position that they were in the beginning, so that you could have, a bunch of discrete adventures. Matt Dillon was always Matt Dillon, Rockford was always Rockford, and they had adventures, but at the end they came out of it pretty much the same. And now, of course, they have, everybody wants to do Breaking Bad, and everybody wants to do, Game of Thrones or whatever, and so they insist that everything constantly change. I think probably I had something to do with that, because I think one of the first series that really changed as it went along, was Cheers. And but it was very gradual kind of change, and certainly it wasn't, you didn't have, Norm and Cliff being any different from time to time, and within
a particular season, Cheers was still a comedy series, and so the end would return you more or less to the status quo of the season.
But I miss that. I kind of miss that. I miss the feeling that that Travis McGee was always going to be on that boat, and that Philip Marlowe was always going to be Philip Marlowe. And
I think there's even an art to that, when you think about it. Because what people will say in interviews is they go, that's not what life is like. Life moves forward, which always strikes me as just the most absurd and disingenuous thing to say in any interview. Where you go, well, my version of a Martian, or my version of a guy who can control weather with his mind, is much more realistic than your version. It's the most absurd. Because this is not life.
And also, I think I question whether or not people really change that much anyway. I'm pretty much the same as I was when I was 8 years old. There have been things that have happened to me, but I don't know.
So you go back and forth between television, writing for TV, and writing novels, and so I'm just curious about how the process is different for all there, and did you branch into one because you found the other wasn't meeting a particular need of yours, or
it wasn't. I got into television at first because I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to make a living as a writer, and that was what presented itself to me. So I went with that.
Not many people can say that.
Well, I was lucky.
That's something you hear every day.
I was lucky. But I've written for really good shows and had a really good time. But at the same time, you do have a certain desire to do your own thing that's sort of separate from the show, and that was really what made me want to write novels. Not for the money, because there isn't a lot of money in it. But because I just wanted to do something that that was mine from the beginning to the end, and
it's your IP.
And I still write for television. I still love it. I love being in the room with other writers, and I love ideas, bouncing off ideas, and all that. But at the same time, I like to have that time when I'm just by myself and I'm just writing.
When you write for a television series. This is something so I've never done that, so this is something that's sort of exotic to me. When you write for a television series, let's say that you're the named writer of a particular episode. Right. This is the episode where our main character thinks for a moment that he's going to burn down his own house accidentally.
Right.
And he spends the episode racing home. I'm just making this up. That's your episode, all right? But in fact, isn't it the case that actually most of the writers on the staff will at some point or another touch the script and massage it?
Well, it certainly, yes, absolutely. And it depends upon whether or not you're talking about a comedy series or a drama series. Certainly in a comedy series, you break the story as we call it. You come up with the story all in a room together.
Right.
You outline it and figure out what it is. Then, and often you don't even know that you're going to do that story until it's broken, and then the showrunner or whoever decides you're going to do that story, And so you go off and write the outline, you go off and write the draft, maybe you go off and write a second draft if there's time, and then it comes back in, and then from that, it's anybody's, everybody gets to contribute to it before it goes to the table. And in rehearsal, of course, there's a lot of work done on it.
Yeah.
So that on Cheers, by the time when I watch a rerun of Cheers, I have no idea whether I wrote that episode. I have no earthly notion. I can't remember it. I remember the episode. I remember the jokes. Oh, I wrote that joke. And then at the end, or maybe at the beginning, I don't know, my name comes up, and I think, oh, God, I wrote that episode. Or my name comes up by somebody else's name. Oh, I didn't write that episode. It's all, it's kind of done as a group. You certainly get to do the draft by yourself. And if the draft is, a great draft, it might, survive pretty much intact, but it very seldom does. And even in a drama, at least the dramas that I've worked on, you tend to break the story in the room, and then you write it, and that's more yours, unless of course the showrunner decides he wants to take a hand on it, in which of course, in most shows the showrunner takes a draft, or does a pass on it, as they call it.
But more or less strong according to his personality.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Some showrunners having very strong voices.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, or whether or not he has other things to do that week.
So when you think about having spent a long time working in TV,
right?
And so that means that you carry around in your head these notions of how to open a scene, how to close a scene, proportionally to where we are in the length of the work,
right?
How far we should be from moving the plot along,
right?
So you have this model in your head of how a story should progress. So does that affect your novel writing? In other words, when you go to write down a mystery,
sure.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in your head how to write a scene, how to write, pace a story, how to keep it, moving, when to slow it down, when to speed it up, all that stuff. All those rules totally apply to any kind of writing. So it's that is the same regardless of whether you're writing a novel or a screenplay or a television pilot or a television episode. Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious. Do you like? Does this all work subconsciously, and you don't bother, or I know I interviewed Jennifer Ziegler. She's a children's author. She actually outlines her books in Excel. I mean, she just so that a certain number of, it goes down a column and you can see acts 1, 2, and 3, and do you outline or do you not outline?
It depends. I do generally outline because in TV, you get used to the idea that you have to do an outline, and then that because everybody has to approve it and all that. So
sure.
So in general, I've learned, and I'm used to doing an outline. I don't do an outline nearly as much completely as when I'm writing a book for myself, because I don't have to have anybody approve it. So I can wing it, and sometimes I regret that.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes I think it'd be good to have a really detailed outline that I could look at, but sometimes it's also kind of freeing. Because the danger, of course, is that when you outline everything exactly, and you know where it's going, you tend to telegraph points, plot points that are going to come up, or you tend to get just kind of bored with something because you already figured it out.
Yeah.
So
no, and there are those places. I find other people complain about this less than I do because I like something masterful sometimes, but sometimes you can see a plot go ka-chunk as though suddenly people's like, you know what, it's time to be done with all of this whole middle section and start moving into Act 3. So like all of a sudden plot just appears in a sport coat and says, I'm plot. We're getting back towards Act 3. Come on. And that,
well, you've spotted the one of the main tricks.
Yeah.
What the, yes, I sometimes wish that I didn't know so much because I could enjoy it more when I watch shows or read shows.
Now you raise an interesting point because some people, you're right. Some people may not be able to see those turns. You read enough outlines and they come together. But when you're writing, I always ask everybody about their process. You're working on a number of books right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you are writing, do you write at home? Do you go out to Starbucks? What do you do?
I do both. Generally, I write at home. Sometimes I go to a coffee house and write. If I'm writing with somebody else, then I'll either go to an office or they'll go to my house, or I'll go to their house. I've gotten used to writing with a lot of activity around me, so that when I'm alone in a room and there's nothing going on and no music and nothing, I'm just sort of, I don't know,
you find it difficult to focus?
Yeah, I find it difficult to focus, yeah, whereas when there's a lot of activity going around and the dog is jumping over me or I'm at a coffee house and people are talking and all that, somehow that I can build a bubble around myself and distract myself, and that, for some reason, that works better.
I've certainly found that to be in busy coffee houses, busy bars, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes less so at home. It can be difficult for me to concentrate at home, but different people have different stories on this.
Yeah.
Wow. So
nowadays, actually, it's great because I can have baseball on while I'm writing, which is.
There's nothing like baseball on the radio, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah.
So, I wanted to. Okay, here's a random thing I wanted to ask you about. You are at this point seated in the house that was in one of the movies we did on the podcast.
Yes.
Tell me again, what is that?
I've lived in this house for 25 years or longer. But when I first moved here, I hadn't lived here very long, and the Stepford Children was on, and I was watching it, and they were driving through their community of Stepford, and they drove up to our house, and were going into our house. And then to make it weirder, they didn't just use the exterior of the house. They used the living room, they used the bedrooms, they used the whole interior of our house. So while I was watching this movie, they were walking through the living room. While I was in the living room, they were in the living room. It was one of the weirdest things that I've ever experienced. Actually, I watched it again recently, and because I showed it to some people just to freak them out.
Sure.
And they're in the dining room, they're in the living room, they're in the bedroom. It's wild.
It's a wonder. So we did Stepford Children as part of our Stepford.
Yes, I know.
It was so cool to hear. Actually, it was cool to look at that film and see, just a kind of a beautiful look at suburban L.A. in the 80s.
Oh yeah. I mean, they must have filmed it just a couple of years before we moved in.
Wow.
And the other houses are also houses down the street from us. So I mean, everything was everything but the lake area. I don't know where they filmed that because there ain't no lake here. But that's funny you should mention that. Yeah, it doesn't seem like a very big. It seems like a reservoir, but where it is, God only knows. Yeah,
IMDb would help us out there. So I've seen a lot of your social media postings. And one thing that I find is you have this big interest in, and this is where we have a lot in common because I do the same thing. You'll post all of this sort of random pop culture stuff that you're just sort of into that day. Like be it maybe some amazing film noir from the 40s or maybe a really interesting family drama from the late 70s or a thriller from the 80s or whatever. And you're just constantly sort of churning through the 20th century. And I'm curious, I know for a fact that if I went out and grabbed a random development executive from a major studio and said, you know what I was watching the other day? A Summer Place. They would just stare at you.
Well, I have many odd and specific interests, and I get together every week with a friend of mine, Mark Jordan Legan, who does the NPR movie stuff on KPCC.
He's also a Monument writer, yeah.
And we watch all kinds of things. But lately we've been and for the past couple of years, we've been very into the television movie of the ABC television movies of the 70s or any television movies of the 70s. And, it's just an unexplored, great, some of them are so good. Obviously the Night Stalker and Duel, but we watched Kill Me If You Can last week with Alan Alda, and Glass House with Alan Alda, and they're just a stunning. It was a great time. It was one of those times when they let people do whatever they kind of wanted to do, and a lot of them are crap, but a lot of them are really good, and they're really forgotten.
Well,
they're not out on video. You generally have to get a bootleg copy of it to watch it. Dying Room Only, all the Richard Matheson ones that he did, but also they're just there were just hundreds of them. There was one with.
What I was wondering was, you're getting into this. So I think you almost started to say that there was an element of inspiration here. And surely that's the case, right? I mean, you're watching something nobody else is watching. Maybe it gives you an idea nobody else gets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really like, we all have periods that we really like. I really like the 70s, and I worked on Terriers, and that show was certainly, very much of a kind of a 70s Cutter and Bone, Cutter's Way kind of series that, was sort of steeped in that kind of, late 70s.
That's cool.
Yeah, and also, older stuff from the 30s I love too, but I think, the reason I like low budget movies is that they aren't really as thought out and poured over. Attention is important. They don't have a million executives giving notes about this, that, and the other, and everything isn't all sort of group
so
thing.
You can get something really daring, right?
You can get something really daring.
It's going to come and go. Nobody's going to see it again, so
maybe we try. Right. And sometimes that means it's lousy, but if it's lousy, it's usually lousy in an interesting way. And sometimes I mean it's very good.
I caught one the other day with Andy Griffith, where Andy Griffith played a police chief in I remember he was in a canyon basically. He's like in a California town investigating murders. This is like a 1978 or so.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I wish I'd done more research before answering this question. But there are three movies. There are at least three movies that are written by the same writer.
Yeah.
That kind of address the same setting, and they're about a sheriff in a small town, and in one of them he's played by Andy Griffith, and another one he's played by Jim Garner.
Seriously?
And another one I believe he's played by Alan Alda, I think. There's They Only Kill Their Masters, and I can't remember the names of the other ones, but it was like this guy, I can't remember the name of the writer either, I'm sorry. This guy was sort of trying to get this thing going.
Yeah.
He was doing a series of pilots in a way, although they were TV movies.
Yes. That's really interesting.
And I wish he'd done it because they're really good.
Well, it's a wonderful setting. I mean, the small town in this sort of California canyon look, a lot of scrub. It's a great looking. It's a great place to have what amounts to In the Heat of the Night, only in a different sort of sort of setting.
Yeah.
So,
and there's there was some movie with David Jansen. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry. that it was about a kidnapping where a girl was buried alive and they were rushing to find her and all that sort of thing. It was just a really good movie. I think it was a true story. It was a really good movie. And
no, those tight little 90-minute thrillers can be really fantastic.
There's one called The Old Man Who Cried Wolf with Edward G. Robinson that is, just so bleak. The end of it is so awful that you just think, what the hell? How did this ever get made? Everything is awful in this movie from the beginning, and it only gets worse and worse and worse.
If I wasn't careful, I could actually just spend like the next half hour going, hey, have you seen that one where David Jansen did this? And that actually probably wouldn't serve us. But, okay, so the next book coming out is a sequel to Crush, and also you have another Ivanovich book.
Yeah, well,
actually
the one with Ivanovich comes out in June, I think, or August. August, I think now. It's called Curious Minds, and the sequel to Crush comes out in, I think, November.
Excellent.
And I really should be writing it now. So.
All right. Well, the latest one, people can still get Crush in paperback and
it's available
and everything else, as well as 15 Minutes to Live, which Amazon just had great success with like last week. And so these are some wonderful.
I know it had some weird bump where it did.
Yeah, well, they promoted it, and it jumped up to like #1 in hard-boiled detective. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Phoef Sutton, I'm very thankful that you would spend time with us and chat about your work, and
I'd love to do it again.
Maybe we'll get a chance to do it again when the new one's coming out. And
sure, that'd be great.
Well, I'll dig up more obscure inspirations for us both.
All right.
Have a fantastic evening in the home of the Stepford Children, and I'll talk to you.